The snow came early and hard, burying the valley in silence. By the third night, the cold had settled in like a living thing, heavy and patient. Smoke rose from most cabins without rest, yet one place stayed quiet, and it was not the one anyone expected to last. They called the place the Hollow of Giants. A tight grove of pine trees stood there, thick as towers and older than any man on the ridge. The trees pressed close together, their trunks wide and scarred, their roots twisting deep into the earth. Most trappers kept their distance, not because of ghosts, though some claimed the air felt watched, but because of the silence. Inside the grove, sound died quickly. Bird song vanished. Even footsteps felt too loud, too wrong. Eli Mercer chose that spot the moment he saw it. He had walked the tree line for 4 days, watching how wind moved and where frost stayed longest. He was not looking for luck. He was looking for signs. Where snow drifted, where shadows held, where animals refused to step. He tied strips of raw bacon to posts and left them overnight. In the morning, nothing touched them. The grove stayed untouched. The trees were massive, trunks wider than oxen, bark thick as stacked blankets, roots like iron chains buried in the soil. Eli had grown up around sawmills, yet he had never seen pine like this. No one built there. Too cramped, they said. Too dark. Too strange. But to Eli, it felt like shelter shaped by time. On the 5th morning of October, he set the first stone for his foundation. The wind clawed across open ground, but inside the grove it stayed calm. The air felt softer there, warmer. Sunlight filtered through layers of branches and reached the ground slowly. Snow melted slower too, but the cold did not bite as sharply. Old Buck Harmon passed by while Eli measured timber between 2 trees. Buck spat into the snow and laughed. He had frostbite scars on both ears and a voice like gravel. "You build in there, son. You'll freeze before Christmas," Buck said. "Trees like that drink heat. You'll never see sunlight again." Eli nodded. He was not there to argue with men who built fast and froze early. His plan was simple, though it sounded strange. He would not cut the trees. He would build between them, into them, letting their strength do the work. Where others cleared land, Eli wove his cabin into the forest. He carved just enough space for a narrow frame. The trunks would form half the walls. The grove would shield him from wind and snow. That night, while others drank by open fires, Eli slept beneath snow-dusted branches. The wind howled everywhere, except where he lay. By the 2nd week, word spread. Folks said Eli was digging his own grave. Other cabins went up fast that year. 3 days from bare ground to roof. Log walls stacked quick, moss packed into gaps, bark roofs slanted and thin. Comfort did not matter. Only survival did. Eli worked slowly. Each log was stripped of bark, shaved to fit tight. No shortcuts. No rushing. The trees decided the shape. He followed their curve, anchoring corners where trunks already stood strong. Neighbors gathered to watch. Standing just outside the grove, they folded their arms and laughed. "He's boxing himself in." No light, no air. That place looks like a coffin. They were not cruel. They were certain. Men who had lived through winters before and trusted what they knew. You cleared land. You chased sun. You fought the cold head on. Eli said nothing. He shaved beams and listened to the wind instead of the talk. At night his fire burned low, just a glow between the trunks. From a distance it looked like the forest swallowed it. Snow under the grove stayed smooth and even. No drifting, no wind scars. One morning a boy wandered in. He was 10, red-faced from cold, holding a biscuit in a cloth. "Ma says you're crazy," the boy said. "But Pa says you built a barn once that never leaked." Eli took the biscuit and nodded. "Tell your pa he's half right. What's the other half?" Eli pointed up at the trees. "These fellas built their roofs a long time before I got here." The boy looked around wide-eyed. "You scared they'll fall?" "No," Eli said. "Trees this old have stood longer than I ever will. I'm just borrowing their strength." The laughter faded after that. though it never fully stopped. Eli Mercer was not a man people followed. He spoke little. He drank less. Folks knew 3 things about him. He once ran horses for the army. He lost his wife in a spring flood back east, and he never left a job half done. He arrived in the valley with a 3-wheeled handcart and an old mule. No wagon, no hired hands, just a bedroll, an axe with a worn handle, a stove box, and a coil of copper pipe wrapped like treasure. People noticed the pipe. No one brought copper to build a trapping cabin. It was too soft, too precious. Eli never explained. He had not come west for furs or land. He came with time and a need to prove something, not to men, but to the mountains. After his wife drowned when a river took their cabin, Eli never rebuilt. He buried her and walked west until the air turned thin and clean. Now he was building again. Not a home, a promise. Before raising walls, Eli spent 3 days sitting inside the grove. He barely moved. He watched frost linger near certain roots. He watched snow slide clean from some branches and pile against others. He listened to how wind curved through trunks. Temperature he knew was always moving. He started with the ground. Most men dug just enough to stack logs. Eli dug deeper, past the frost line, until he found dry earth. He laid gravel and stone, then packed clay on top, shaping it like a shallow bowl with a hidden drain. Beneath that clay, he coiled his copper pipe. It was not magic. It was patience. He connected the pipe to the stove box and ran the flue upward through a hollowed log. Before raising walls, he tested it. Smoke rose slow and clean. No backdraft. The clay floor warmed his legs. Only then did he build upward. Not walls, but ribs. Logs curved inward, cradled by living trunks. The cabin leaned slightly east to catch morning light. The door sat under thick canopy where snow fell light even in storms. Even unfinished, the cabin felt warmer than the open clearing. Wind could not find its way inside. Heat rose, rolled along the curved ceiling, and came back down instead of escaping. One night, a sudden cold snap hit. Frost cracked underfoot. Eli sat inside with only embers glowing. He waited for the cold to creep in. It did not. Outside the grove, men fed fires through the night. Inside, Eli slept 6 hours straight. By late October, smoke curled day and night from other cabins. Men chopped wood until their shirts soaked with sweat. Eli moved slower. His cabin looked unfinished to most. No porch, one window without glass. A roof he adjusted daily, but after a storm, while drifts buried the valley, only a few inches lay beneath his trees. The path to his woodpile stayed dry. Inside, the air felt warm and alive, like the inside of a den. One morning, Eli let his fire go out on purpose. He had stored heat in stone and clay. He sealed the door and slept. At dawn, his breath did not fog. The back wall stayed warm. The pipe held clear. Men passing by no longer laughed. They watched. The first real freeze came on November 2nd. The air went still. Pipes cracked. Doors split. Fires failed. Eli sat inside his finished cabin, kettle steaming. Outside, the cold fell like a blade. By morning, frost coated everything. One cabin door split in two. A man was found shaking beside a dead fire. Word began to spread. Eli's cabin had held. No one knew the number yet. They only knew one thing. The place everyone mocked had not frozen, and winter was just beginning. It pressed harder, as if offended that one small cabin had refused to bow. The valley woke each morning to new damage. Split beams, cracked flues, ice inside water barrels. Men moved slower now, faces tight, eyes always on the sky. Eli Mercer noticed everything without saying a word. Smoke from other cabins no longer rose straight. It crawled low and sideways, heavy with trouble. Fires that once warmed now demanded constant feeding. Wood piles shrank fast. Axes rang from dawn until dark, not from confidence, but fear. Inside the grove, Eli's cabin stayed quiet. He did not boast. He did not invite. He simply lived. He cooked once a day. He slept through the night. The clay beneath his feet released warmth like a held breath. The trees stood unmoved, breaking the wind before it reached him. Men began to pass closer when they walked the ridge. They slowed near the grove, pretending to check traps or adjust loads. More than once, Eli felt eyes on his door. The second hard storm arrived without warning. Snow fell thick and sideways, driven by wind sharp enough to peel bark. It piled against cabins built in the open, sealing doors shut and choking chimneys. One roof caved under the weight before midnight. That was when the first knock came. It was late. Eli had banked his fire and sat reading by lantern light. The knock was not loud. Just 3 slow strikes, careful, almost ashamed. Eli stood, crossed the room, and opened the outer door. A man stood there shaking, beard stiff with ice. It was Jacob Reed, a strong builder who once laughed loudest at the grove. "I won't stay long," Jacob said quickly. "Just need to warm my hands." Eli stepped aside. Jacob entered the small entry space, stamping snow from his boots. His breath slowed almost at once. "This room," Jacob said, looking around. "It's warmer than my whole place." Eli waited. When Jacob looked steadier, Eli opened the inner door. Jacob froze again, but this time from shock. The warmth rolled over him, steady and dry. His shoulders dropped without him noticing. "How?" he whispered. Eli poured him a cup of broth and handed it over. Jacob stayed 20 minutes, then 30. When he left, he did not laugh. He did not speak. He walked back into the storm with his head lowered. By morning, 2 more cabins had failed. The valley shifted after that. Pride cracked like frozen wood. Men stopped pretending. They came quietly, one by one, not to mock, but to see. Eli did not turn anyone away. He did not explain much either. He let them stand inside, feel the air, touch the walls, notice what did not happen. No drafts, no smoke sting, no damp cold creeping up from the floor. One man ran his palm along the clay-packed wall and shook his head. "Feels alive," he said. Eli nodded. "It is." The storm held for 3 days. On the second night, the temperature dropped lower than anyone remembered. Fires burned hot and fast, then died. Men woke with numb hands and burning lungs. One family packed what they could and fled downhill in the dark. Eli lit his stove once that night. Just once. The warmth stayed. By the 3rd morning, the Bauer brothers' cabin was gone. A chimney failure filled the room with smoke, then fire. They escaped with their coats and nothing else. They reached Eli's grove before sunrise. Eli heard them before they knocked. He opened the door and waved them in without a word. They crowded into the entry, 4 men shaking, eyes red, faces gray. When Eli opened the inner door, one of them cried. Not loudly, just a broken sound that slipped out when the warmth hit his chest. They slept on the floor that night. Eli fed the stove once before bed. The cabin held. That was when someone noticed the thermometer. It hung plain on the back wall, nothing special. Brass face. Red needle. 69. No one spoke at first. They just stared. "That thing broke?" one man asked. Eli shook his head. They checked it again before dawn. Still the same. Outside, the valley sat buried and frozen. Inside, the air stayed calm. Word spread fast now. Faster than fear. Faster than snow. By the 4th night, men stood at the edge of the grove, unsure what to do. Eli opened the door and let them in one by one. No crowding. No noise. Just bodies warming and breathing again. He added no extra firewood. He did not need to. The cabin was doing what it was built to do. Between storms, Eli showed them small things. How the ground near the trees stayed warmer. How the roof shed weight instead of holding it. How the double door space slowed the cold like a gate. "Winter kills fast," Eli said once. "Quiet. You slow it down. You live." Men listened now. They asked questions with their hands wrapped around warm cups. They stopped arguing and started watching. Another storm came. Worse than the last. This one did not scream. It pressed. Heavy snow. Crushing weight. Wind that pried and twisted instead of howling. Cabins groaned. Roofs sagged. One collapsed while the family was still inside. They barely crawled out. Eli's roof did not move. A tree fell across it late that night. The impact shook the cabin hard enough to rattle cups from the shelf. Eli stood, listened, waited. The roof held, the tree split. The warmth did not change. By morning, the valley looked broken. Cabins leaned. Chimneys lay snapped. Fires smoldered low or not at all. Men gathered near Eli's grove without being asked. He opened the door and made room. That was when the laughter truly ended. No one joked anymore. No one questioned the shade or the narrow walls. They sat quietly, grateful, humbled. Someone finally asked, "Why here?" Eli looked at the trees. Because they already knew how to survive. When the cold finally eased, it did not retreat. It simply paused. Enough for men to breathe. Enough to repair what they could. They worked differently now. They angled roofs. They added entry spaces. They packed clay. They stopped cutting trees that had stood longer than memory. Ellie helped when asked. He did not lead. He did not preach. He corrected a joint here, showed a slope there. The grove was no longer a joke. It was a lesson. One evening, Buck Harmon stood beside Eli, watching smoke rise from repaired cabins. "We laughed," Buck said. "Thought you were hiding." Eli shook his head. "I was listening. The cold would return. Everyone knew that. Winter was not finished, but this time, the valley was ready. And at the center of it stood one quiet cabin in a grove of giants, holding steady at 69 degrees, waiting for the next test. The worst of winter did not end with noise. It faded the way a tired man sits down, slow and heavy. The storms grew shorter. The night stayed cold, but the wind lost its edge. What remained was damage, memory, and a quiet change in how the valley breathed. Eli Mercer noticed the change first in the mornings. Frost still clung to the ground, but it released sooner. Snow softened around the roots of the old trees. The grove stayed calm, just as it always had, but now it was no longer alone. Paths led to it. Footsteps pressed into the snow where once there had been none. Men came not to seek warmth anymore, but understanding. They brought tools, not desperation. Bent hinges, warped shutters, chipped beams. They stood beside Eli without crowding him, and waited. He never rushed. He showed them how corners failed first, how cold slipped in where pride told you it would not. He taught them to read the ground before cutting a single log. "Build slower," he said. "The winter never hurries. Why should you?" They listened. Cabins began to change across the valley. Entry spaces appeared. Roofs leaned instead of fighting gravity. Clay replaced loose moss. Chimneys bent and turned, holding heat longer. Fires burned lower and lasted longer. No one called it copying Eli. They called it learning. The thermometer stayed where it was. Eli never moved it. 69 on the worst nights. 68 when the door opened too often. 70 when the sun reached the eastern wall just right. It became less a number and more a promise, proof that winter could be endured without being battled. One night late in the season, Buck Harmon sat inside the grove with Eli, hands wrapped around a tin cup. "You could have told us," Buck said. Eli shook his head. "Would not have mattered." Buck nodded. "We needed to feel it first." They sat in silence after that. The fire burned low. It did not need tending. Spring did not rush in. It crept. Frost pulled back an inch at a time. Ice loosened its grip on the river. Birds returned carefully, as if unsure they were welcome. The cabins that had been rebuilt held. The ones that had not were abandoned. No one laughed at the grove anymore. Children played beneath the trees. Men walked there in the mornings to check shadows and melt lines. Eli stayed quiet through it all. Years passed. The grove changed slowly. New saplings grew where old trees fell. Moss climbed higher on trunks. Eli's cabin weathered, but it did not weaken. The joints stayed tight. The roof bloomed with small flowers each spring. The floor never froze. Eli lived long enough to see 2 more winters. milder ones, easier ones, winters shaped by lessons learned the hard way. Just was and do's and days. When he passed, there was no great noise, no last words meant for crowds. He was buried on the ridge where the wind softened first each year. The men planted a young pine at his head, straight, strong, quiet. The cabin stayed. Travelers who passed through the valley heard the story. Some doubted it. Some laughed just as the others once had. Then they stepped inside and felt the air. Still, warm, calm. The thermometer still hung on the wall. 69. The grove kept its silence. The cabin kept its warmth, and the valley remembered, not the cold, but the man who chose to listen instead of fight, and built something that refused to fail.